In the ever-evolving panorama of America's powerful dynasties, few families have sculpted the societal, political, and economic landscapes with such unrelenting vigor and artistry as the Roosevelts. Originating from 17th century Dutch immigrant roots in what would become New York City, the name Roosevelt quickly rose to encapsulate a kind of American royalty, whether brandishing their clout at the presidential podium or orchestrating financial miracles from ornate boardrooms. Indeed, the history of the Roosevelt family isn't merely a genealogical record, it's an exhilarating chronicle of American power and influence, spanning from the present day back to before the United States was even a country. Join us in today's episode of Old Money Luxury as we bring you through the entire journey and describe how the Roosevelts went from old money to presidents. Our story begins in the year 1650, more than 100 years before the founding of the United States, when America's first Roosevelt ancestor, the Dutch-born Claes Maartenszen van Rosenvelt, landed in the teeming harbors of New Amsterdam, a city that would grow into the metropolis we now know as New York City. In 1652, lured by the siren call of untapped prospects, Claes procured a considerable swathe of prime land in a fertile expanse in what is presently known as Midtown Manhattan from one Lambert van Valkenburg. Interestingly, this clairvoyant acquisition encompassed terrain that was destined to host monumental landmarks such as the Empire State Building, the legendary Madison Avenue of Mad Men fame, and the J.P. Morgan Library. Specifically, the area stretched from present-day Lexington Avenue and Fifth Avenue to roughly 29th Street, over to 35th Street. In terms of contemporary measurements, this area comprised an excess of 50 acres of prime real estate, with Claes's son, Nicholas, leveraging the land ownership to ascend to the prominent position of the city's first alderman, thus pioneering the family name's inextricable connection with political power and financial influence. Now, Nicholas's children, Johannes and Jacobus, perpetuated their father's esteemed legacy, establishing two distinguished Roosevelt lineages, those hailing from the environs of Oyster Bay and Hyde Park. To put this into perspective, both Oyster Bay and Hyde Park were settings that helped inspire the neighborhoods dramatized in F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby and its subsequent films. So even back then, it would seem the Roosevelts knew a thing or two about where old money likes to reside. Now, Johannes Roosevelt was an entrepreneur endowed with extraordinary foresight, quickly becoming a family trait, and the successive generations born of Johannes wove themselves into New York's most elite circles through strategic matrimonial alliances with other prosperous families and shrewd real estate acquisitions in key locations around the city, as previously mentioned. Their marital liaisons served not merely as romantic unions, but as tactical partnerships that cemented their preeminence among New York's high society, the Roosevelt name thus growing to be reverently uttered alongside the city's most formidable luminaries. Next, Cornelius Roosevelt, the great-grandson of Johannes, significantly bolstered the family's wealth and empire-like ambitions. Inheriting a substantial fortune from his father, James Jacobus Roosevelt, in 1840, he quickly further enmeshed the name Roosevelt with New York City's financial elite. Initially involved in hardware imports, Cornelius wisely shifted his focus to the lucrative plate glass industry, significantly boosting his wealth. Moreover, Cornelius didn't just stop at industry. He ventured into finance as the founding director of the Chemical Bank of New York, a precursor to today's J.P. Morgan Chase & Company. In terms of raw numbers, he stood shoulder to shoulder with leading millionaires of his era, such as William B. Astor and Peter Lorillard. And by 1868, his fortune had likely soared to an estimated $25 million, equivalent to roughly $600 million today. Thus, while the name Roosevelt is now predominantly linked with political power, we can't overlook its deep entanglement with New York City's financial aristocracy. Indeed, this monumental family was a pillar in the city's transition from a modest Dutch trading post to an unparalleled epicenter of wealth and power, on both a national and global scale. Yet, as we know, wealth is but one dimension of success, and working your way into the White House during America's Gilded Age presents an entirely separate set of challenges and achievements. Little did Cornelius know that his grandson, Theodore, a child that he undoubtedly knew since their lifetimes overlapped significantly, would stretch well past the successes of even his multimillionaire grandfather. in just a few short decades. Across the East River from Manhattan, at the same time, the real estate Roosevelts were building their empire. Family member Isaac Roosevelt, the great-great-grandfather of FDR, was quickly becoming one of the first large-scale sugar refiners in New York City, before leveraging that influence to serve in the New York State Assembly and the State Constitutional Convention. Therefore, Isaac holds the notable distinction as having achieved the most political success of any Roosevelt before his cousin, the future President Teddy. However, it would be uncouth to not mention here that Isaac's sugar business was heavily reliant on slave labor, as New York City's sugar was cultivated almost entirely by enslaved persons in the Caribbean. Thus, without mincing words, an essential root of the substantial wealth, prominence, and influence that the Hyde Park Roosevelts came to amass, Franklin and Eleanor's line of the family, derived directly from America's engagement in the transatlantic slave trade. With Isaac's passing, the torch of Roosevelt ambition was bequeathed to ensuing generations. James, Isaac's son, donned the familial mantle with vim and vigor as he additionally wove through the complex corridors of New York City's political stage, the banking sector, and the nuanced world of sugar refinement. More importantly, an unforgettable headquarters of the family's prominence would be purchased by James and his lineal successors in 1819, when they banded together to create a sanctuary for the Roosevelts in Hyde Park, New York. A few decades later, in the throbbing core of New York City, another world-changing Roosevelt was brought forth into the world in the morning hours of the 27th of October, 1858. Theodore Roosevelt, the second child in a brood of four, seemed preordained for unparalleled achievements. His father, Theodore Sr., had descended from a cadre of affluent entrepreneurs in the Roosevelt family line, while concurrently his mother, the winsome Martha "Mittie" Roosevelt, drew her heritage from the agrarian expanses of a Georgian plantation. Nurtured within the warmth of a close-knit domestic sphere, young Theodore, affectionately termed Teedy, found his childhood beset by a looming malaise, recurrent asthma that adhered to him with unyielding obstinacy. Fueled by youthful determination, he resolved to fortify his physique. In this aspiration, he discovered a lifelong commitment to building the body's vitality, adopting gymnastic routines and weightlifting regimens, exuberantly subscribing to the philosophy of leading a strenuous life. Set against a backdrop of private tutors and globe-trotting adventures, including a trip to the then German Empire, Theodore's quenchless intellectual appetite only intensified. This scholarly yearning propelled him to Harvard University's hallowed halls in 1876, where his academic explorations encompassed German linguistics, natural history, biology, forensic studies, and rhetorical composition. Yet his ebullience transcended scholarly limits as he enthusiastically delved into boxing and wrestling, thereby wholeheartedly welcoming the thrill of physical enterprise. Then, in an extraordinary twist of fate, love graced Theodore's already monumental life path. It was through a fortuitous introduction by a mutual acquaintance at Harvard that he encountered Alice Hathaway Lee, the heiress of a prosperous New England banking dynasty. Their affections for each other matured with swift intensity, culminating in vows exchanged amidst the russet hues of October in the year 1880. Although Theodore initially embarked on legal studies at Columbia Law School, the clarion call of public service resounded too powerfully to ignore, leading him to forsake his legal ambitions within just a year. At that moment, we have to wonder if even Teddy himself was ready for what would happen next, as his indomitable zest for life and political verve would not only lead him to the top of power in the United States, but usher in a family dominance over America's trajectory that had never been seen before or since. Now, in the year 1884, Theodore Roosevelt faced a gut-wrenching calamity that shattered his world in a mere 48 hours. As Alice delivered their firstborn daughter, Alice Lee, Theodore was forced to confront the unspeakable sorrow of losing both his mother to typhoid and his cherished Alice to renal complications, all within the confines of their home. Heart-rending grief led him to immerse himself in his political obligations for the ensuing 4 months. However, perhaps to process the heartache, the irrefutable allure of untamed landscapes called him away from the East Coast. Theodore journeyed into the rough-hewn Dakota Badlands, finding a semblance of solace as a cattle rancher and frontier wayfarer. Amidst the sprawling plains, he found a retreat in grizzly bear hunting and the pastoral care of his livestock. The unforgiving winter of 1887 to 1888 decimated most of his cattle, steering his resolve to return to the East Coast, where he nurtured a love rekindled for his childhood infatuation, Edith Kermit Carow. In a move worthy of romantic novels, the couple pledged their eternal devotion in a remote English ceremony in 1886. United, they constructed their domestic sanctuary in the captivating environs of Sagamore Hill in one of the aforementioned hometowns, Oyster Bay, New York. Their family expanded in subsequent years, with another Theodore, Kermit, Ethel, Archibald and Quentin joining Alice. And upon his return to New York, Teddy fervently resumed his written endeavors, which initially had gained recognition with his esteemed volume, The Naval War of 1812, published in 1882. During this prolific stretch, he authored several notable works, including The Life of Thomas Hart Benton in 1887, The Life of Gouverneur Morris in 1888, and his magnum opus, The Winning of the West, a 4-volume epic with a release schedule that spanned more than a half-decade. Furthermore, political aspirations rekindled within Theodore Roosevelt as he sought the position of New York City's mayor in 1886, albeit without attaining victory. However, his ensuing endorsement of Republican presidential candidate Benjamin Harrison in 1888 propelled him to the national stage. Harrison's triumph facilitated Theodore's appointment to the Civil Service Commission, a responsibility he honored with steadfast dedication, unwavering in his commitment, even when faced with considerable political persuasions to bend ethical norms. Adhering to his principled views on civil service laws, Roosevelt didn't waver even after securing a second appointment from Democratic President Grover Cleveland in 1893, despite the disapproval of party luminaries. Transitioning to the role of president of the New York City Police Board in 1895, he pursued reforms with an indomitable will. His endeavors included banning Sunday alcohol sales and purging corruption from the police board itself. The year 1897 marked another career milestone when President-elect William McKinley appointed Teddy Assistant Secretary of the Navy, aligning with Roosevelt's fervent belief in naval power as a cornerstone of national defense, and the explosion of the U.S. battleship Maine in Havana Harbor in 1898 propelled him into immediate action. As acting Secretary of the Navy, he swiftly mobilized the Navy and directed Commodore George Dewey to brace for combat with Spain, a critical prelude to the imminent invasion of the Philippines. As the Spanish-American War broke out, Roosevelt forsook his administrative position to lead the 1st U.S. Volunteer Cavalry, popularly known as the Rough Riders. This eclectic unit, consisting of Ivy League graduates, cowboys, sheriffs, police officers, and Native Americans, stormed San Juan Hill under Roosevelt's leadership, showcasing unmatched bravery even amidst devastating casualties. Their triumphant return to the United States earned them near universal praise and solidified Roosevelt's military legacy. Upon his being crowned a celebrated war hero, Roosevelt found himself courted by New York's Republican Party to vie for the gubernatorial seat. Running against Democrat Judge Augustus Van Wyck in a hotly contested race, Roosevelt clinched a slim victory, bolstered by the influential backing of Thomas C. Platt, the state's Republican Party stalwart. However, Roosevelt's unwavering commitment to autonomous policy-making and patronage quickly led to a rift with Platt. Specifically, as Roosevelt delved into progressive policy measures, such as taxing public utilities, tensions with Platt escalated. Recognizing Roosevelt's capacity to destabilize the Republican state apparatus, Platt cleverly maneuvered to elevate him to the vice presidency in 1900, thus blocking his path to re-election as governor. Accepting the position, Roosevelt recalibrated his ambitions toward the presidency in 1904, fully cognizant that party leaders had choreographed the convention to pave his way. Subsequently, Theodore Roosevelt Jr. emerged as the uncontested choice for vice president in the Republican nomination, a clear sign of the party's confidence in him. With vigor, he took to the campaign trail to support William McKinley, his party's candidate for president. Standing against McKinley were Democratic challengers William Jennings Bryan and Adlai E. Stevenson. And Roosevelt's campaign was nothing short of a spectacle, reaching over 3 million people firsthand. A specially chartered train carried him across more than 20,000 miles as he delivered impassioned addresses in more than 500 locales, spread across 24 states. As newspaper columnist Mr. Dooley humorously noted, "'Tis Tiddy alone that's running," adding, "He ain't a-running, he's galloping." And this energy paid off. With a lead of over 800,000 votes, the McKinley-Roosevelt ticket triumphed, marking one of the largest victories for the Republicans in years. Of the 70.2 million votes cast, McKinley garnered 292 Electoral College votes, dwarfing Bryan's 155, and the win was even more commanding than McKinley's initial victory in 1896. However, tragedy soon struck in September 1901, when President McKinley was assassinated by a wild gunman, somewhat unexpectedly thrusting Theodore Roosevelt into position as the 26th President of the United States, and the youngest to ever hold the office. While Theodore Roosevelt was grappling with his first full term as president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Teddy's cousin, and Eleanor Roosevelt, Teddy's niece, married in front of a glamorous gathering of society's elite on a brisk spring day in 1905. Indeed, this wedding represented more than just marital bliss. It signified the merger of two American dynasties. Franklin's father, James Roosevelt, was already a paragon of old money affluence, not just a successful entrepreneur, but also a generous philanthropist within New York society. Yet Franklin's mother, Sarah Delano Roosevelt, was no less remarkable. She hailed from the Delano family, a lineage known for their maritime and trading empires, which had garnered both significant wealth and social influence over the years. Eleanor Roosevelt's parentage also boasted remarkable elite credentials, adding another layer of complexity to the Roosevelt couple's shared heritage. Her father, Elliott Roosevelt, was a sibling to Theodore Roosevelt. However, his life was tragically marred by struggles with addiction, a plight that colored Eleanor's early years, but also fortified her resilience and sense of empathy. And her mother, Anna Hall Roosevelt, descended from the distinguished Livingston and Ludlow families, both storied names that stretched back to the founding days of the American colonies. Indeed, the Livingstons were influential politicians and landowners whose members included signatories of the Declaration of Independence, while the Ludlows were known for their legal contributions, including their role in framing early American jurisprudence. Therefore, both Franklin and Eleanor were products of families deeply rooted in American history and tradition, yet also profoundly influenced by the progressive ideologies that had evolved within the Roosevelt lineage. You see, the couple's cousin/uncle, Theodore Roosevelt, had played a pivotal role during the progressive era. Franklin would later inherit this dedication to social transformation, while Eleanor would become a legendary champion for gender equality and social fairness. Thus, their matrimony evolved into an ideal collaboration, each complementing the other's traits and talents. Franklin, with his captivating charisma and outgoing nature, provided the vision. Eleanor, intelligent and more reserved, offered practical insight, and together they were an unstoppable force. Years later, when Franklin assumed the presidency in 1933, the United States was plunged into the depths of the Great Depression. Unemployment was rampant, and the economy was on the verge of collapse. Wasting no time, Franklin began to roll out a sequence of initiatives collectively known as the New Deal, aimed at offering relief to the jobless, energizing the economy, and restructuring the financial landscape. The New Deal was a monumental undertaking. Additionally, in the context of New Deal achievements, the Social Security Administration stood out as another seminal program. Serving as a financial safety net, the SSA extended support to the elderly, the differently abled, and those without employment. Though the New Deal faced its share of detractors, those who criticized its cost or argued that it expanded governmental power too much, Franklin D. Roosevelt remained resolute. Furthermore, Franklin D. Roosevelt's leadership during World War II marked another pivotal chapter in his tenure. As Commander-in-Chief, he navigated the United States through one of the darkest periods in human history. The strategic alliance he formed with Winston Churchill and Joseph Stalin, known as the Big Three, played a decisive role in the defeat of the Third Reich. Under his guidance, the US military was mobilized on an unprecedented scale, contributing to victories in both the European and Pacific theaters. His direction of initiatives such as the Manhattan Project also pushed the boundaries of what was scientifically possible, although these actions would generate complex ethical debates for years to come. Following Franklin D. Roosevelt's death in 1945, Eleanor persisted as an influential public persona. Arguably, her magnum opus was her role in crafting the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a seminal document outlining the essential liberties inherent to all human beings. Not only has the Declaration been translated into more than 500 languages, but it also stands as the world's most universally translated document. Her imprint was also felt in the struggle for racial equality in America, as Eleanor was vocal in opposing racial segregation and various forms of discrimination. In fact, she walked side by side with iconic civil rights figures like Martin Luther King Jr., pushing the US towards a more egalitarian future. Eleanor Roosevelt passed away in November 1962 at the age of 78, leaving millions around the globe in a state of sorrow. Her influence on American civic life and the advancement of civil liberties was immeasurable. However, with her passing, the name Roosevelt would not disappear as a fixture of American life. Indeed, we could argue that the next generation of Roosevelts would only further bolster and expand a legacy that was older than the country itself. Born in August 1914, just a few months before the end of hostilities in World War I, Franklin Delano Roosevelt Jr. inherited a name with perhaps no more prestige and pressure than any other moniker in American history. At the time of his birth, his father FDR was Assistant Secretary of the Navy, and after a notable military career, Franklin Jr. held a congressional seat representing New York from 1949 to 1955. There, he poured unflagging energy into representing his constituents and championing issues dear to him, leading to President John F. Kennedy taking note of his prowess and designated him Under Secretary of Commerce in 1963. In this capacity, he contributed to the economic prosperity of the nation, extending the Roosevelt lineage of high-level government involvement and financial power. Further solidifying his family's long commitment to progressive ideals, Roosevelt Jr. served as the inaugural chairman of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission from 1965 to 1966, an agency that became a linchpin in the struggle for civil liberties and workplace fairness. And notably, FDR Jr. himself continued the old money tradition of strategic intermarriage like his father and mother, with Jr. marrying legendary DuPont heiress and socialite Ethel DuPont in 1937. These days, the Roosevelt family is still inextricably connected to both public service and membership in the financial elite, as they have been for literally hundreds of years at this point. For example, Theodore Roosevelt IV has carved out a name for himself as an investment banker and ardent environmentalist. Passionate about conservation and sustainable practices, he's founded multiple eco-focused organizations and championed wildlife and land preservation on a global scale. Tweed Roosevelt, also a great-grandson of President Theodore Roosevelt, heads the Theodore Roosevelt Association as its president and CEO. This non-profit entity is dedicated to safeguarding the enduring impact of President Theodore Roosevelt, and Tweed is a fervent advocate for both ecological conservation and public duty, much like his great-grandfather. As far as descendants of FDR, Mark Roosevelt made his mark in the educational realm, serving as the executive director of St. John's College in Annapolis, Maryland, from 2014 to 2018, and Kermit Roosevelt III has gained recognition as a constitutional law professor at the University of Pennsylvania. All in all, the Roosevelt family is, much like many American dynasties, a collage of contradictions. On one hand, they are a bunch of ruthless, old-money business tacticians, snapping up real estate, financial clout, and political power with the hunger of wolves. On the other, they are a living embodiment of noblesse oblige, a family that never let their extreme wealth and influence get in the way of their responsibility to do good for not only their fellow citizens, but the entire world at large. And now we'd like to see you in the comments. Which American political dynasty would you like us to feature next on the channel? We're eager to start diving into other families who've had a key hand in the history of the United States. So let us know. And if you're hungry to watch another family that is considered basically American royalty, why not click the video on screen to watch our deep dive on the Kennedys? We'll see you there, or in the community below. Thanks for watching and cheers until next time, from all of us here at Old Money Luxury.